Number 1.
Self left her baby daughter with her mother on the evening of March 30, 1983, and went out with one female friend and two male friends to the Wagon Wheel Bar and Restaurant on Highway 1 in Armistead, Louisiana. Later, she told her friends she was leaving to pick up her infant child as she had to be at work early the next morning. Self never arrived at her mother's house to collect the child. Her car was found the next day in the parking lot of the restaurant. The doors and the steering column were locked. Her purse and keys were missing, but her new shoes were in the backseat. In 2006, self-proclaimed serial killer Robert Charles Brown confessed to Self's murder. He has already pleaded guilty to 2 homicides, including the murder of Rocio Sperry, who disappeared from Colorado in 1987 and was never located. A photograph of Brown is posted with this case summary. He stated he met Self in the wagon wheel on the night of her disappearance and later went to her apartment. He was the maintenance man at her apartment complex at the time. He stated he went to her apartment after seeing her at the bar and found her asleep in the bedroom. He covered her mouth with a chloroform-soaked rag and then went to find some rope to bind her, but when he returned, she was dead. He said he dumped her body off a bridge into the Red River. Brown also confessed to murdering 2 other women in the same parish. None of these accounts have been confirmed, and Brown has not been charged in connection with Self's disappearance or the other 2 murders. Investigators are searching for evidence to verify his stories but have found very little indications. Most of his alleged victims were women, but there were some men also. Self's family says that although she had a wild streak in 1983, it is uncharacteristic of her to abandon her child. She was declared legally dead 5 years after her disappearance, but her remains have never been found.
Number 2.
Marjorie attended a church service with her family members in their hometown of Bradford, Pennsylvania during the morning hours of May 8, 1938. Her parents decided to have a Mother's Day picnic afterwards in the White Gravel area, which was a 40-minute drive from Bradford. They drove south along U.S. Route 219, following an old railroad grade from Custer City to Marshburg, Pennsylvania. The Wests entered the White Gravel area from Chapel Fork Road in McKean County. Marjorie picked wildflowers with her 11-year-old sister, Dorothea, later during the day. Dorothea recalled that their parents warned them against walking behind a large boulder near the flowers. She said their father and brother checked the area, but there was a chance that rattlesnakes were hiding near the rock. Dorothea left Marjorie alone while she spoke to their mother at approximately 3 p.m. Marjorie disappeared by the time her sister returned to the area. She has never been heard from again. The girl's mother called the police after an initial search of the area by family members produced no evidence as to Marjorie's whereabouts. Witnesses reported that 2 vehicles drove past the West's picnic site prior to Marjorie's disappearance. Authorities identified the cars and neither was involved in her case. At first it was believed that Marjorie had merely wandered into the woods and became lost. Hundreds of people searched for her in the countryside, and her disappearance received a great deal of publicity. If she had been out in the open for more than a few days, she would have succumbed to exposure. The searchers found what appeared to be a freshly dug grave deep in the woods, but when they dug it up it turned out to be a buried cask of wine. A scrap of lace was also discovered, and some people thought it might be a piece of Marjorie's clothes, but she did not have any lace on her clothing when she disappeared. No footprints or other indications of Marjorie's whereabouts were ever found. A taxi driver in Thomas, West Virginia claimed that he saw a weeping girl matching Marjorie's description and wearing similar clothes riding in a dark green sedan with an unidentified man in his 30s. The sighting took place at 11:38 p.m. on the night of her disappearance. The driver said that the individual said the girl was his daughter and asked the taxi driver where the nearest motel was located. The driver directed him to an establishment across the street. The man left the child in the car and went inside the hotel, but there were no vacancies. The man returned and inquired about a local liquor store. The driver instructed him to stop at a bar down the road. The taxi driver identified Marjorie as the man's passenger several days later. A man matching the description of the unidentified individual refueled at a gas station outside of Thomas, and an attendant reported seeing a bundle wrapped in a gray blanket in the backseat of the car. The man's identity remains a mystery. Investigators determined that the approximate travel time along U.S. Route 219 between the White Gravel area and Thomas, West Virginia was 8 hours. If the individual abducted Marjorie around 3 p.m., they would have arrived in Thomas by 11 o'clock and 11:30 p.m. that evening. Authorities were unable to confirm the child's identity. There was speculation that Marjorie was taken to Canada by other family members, while others theorized that she may have fallen down an abandoned oil well near White Gravel. Some people believed that Marjorie may have been abducted and taken somewhere in the south or southwestern United States. Additional speculation pointed towards the Tennessee Children's Home Society near Memphis, Tennessee. The facility was operated by Georgia Tan, who was initially lauded for placing at-risk children in adoptive homes. Authorities eventually learned that Tan had kidnapped over 1,200 young children during the years 1932 through 1951. The majority of victims were abducted from states bordering Tennessee, although some children resided in Connecticut. Judge Camille Kelly approved Tan's custody bids for the majority of the victims. Tan placed most of the children with childless couples in New York City, New York or Los Angeles, California. None of the theories have been proven, and no one has been implicated in Marjorie's disappearance. Dorothea strongly resembles Marjorie, and her photos are posted with this case summary. Marjorie's case remains unsolved.
Number 3.
Carolyn was last seen in Alvin, Texas sometime in late September 1991. She has never been heard from again. Carolyn's sixth husband was Roy Allen Bernard Sr., a photo of him is posted with this case summary. He was 16 years older than she was. They lived together in Quinlan, Texas. Their relationship was troubled and at one point Carolyn filed charges against Roy for criminal mischief. The couple reconciled, and a month after his release from jail, they purchased a lake house together. In July 1989, Roy went to visit his mother in Oklahoma. He was hiding some of his belongings with his mother to keep them away from Carolyn. He told his mother and sister that he and Carolyn weren't getting along. The last time they saw him was on July 5. He was never heard from again. His 1980 Fiat Strada with Oklahoma license plates disappeared with him. On July 7, Carolyn withdrew over $2,500 from Roy's retirement account. On July 10, his daughter called the police from Louisiana to report him missing, but law enforcement would not accept a missing persons report over the phone. Roy's son, Roy Bernard Jr., went to speak to his stepmother on August 7 and asked where his father was. Carolyn appeared nervous and told Roy Jr. that Roy had gone to Israel on a secret mission. Roy Jr. didn't believe her and reported his father missing the next day. After he filed the report, he checked Roy and Carolyn's lake house and found his father's Fiat parked there. In the aftermath of Roy's disappearance, Carolyn wrote checks on his bank account, sold his pickup truck and motor home, and made her fourth husband trustee of their lake house. 3 days later, Carolyn and another man, Gerald Luther Long, picked up Roy's tools and final paycheck from his job, which had terminated him for non-attendance after his disappearance. 6 days later, she withdrew another $2,300 from Roy's retirement account and closed the account. With Gerald's help, Carolyn transferred everything Roy owned to either her own name or another person's. A photo of Gerald is posted with this case summary. He and Carolyn moved in together, but they fought frequently and kept separating and reconciling. Carolyn complained that Gerald was using marijuana, drank frequently and spent time with other women. Gerald was cooperating with the police about Roy's disappearance, providing them with evidence that implicated Carolyn. In February 1991, Gerald bought a house in then 200 block of McLemore Street in Alvin, Texas. Carolyn moved in with him there. Over the next few months, Gerald was arrested for domestic violence against Carolyn. She left him and went to stay with relatives in Wichita, Kansas for a time before moving back in with her fourth husband, but eventually she and Gerald reconciled again, and they married in June. In August, Carolyn went to the police and said Gerald was a drug dealer and she'd found cocaine in their home. She was registered as an informant with the Drug Enforcement Administration (D) and had a meeting with federal officers about Gerald. Late that month, Gerald was arrested for abusing Carolyn again. She went to the Brazoria County Women's Shelter and stayed for several days. On September 5, Carolyn checked out of the shelter and called her family in Kansas to say she was going there, but first would be stopping by her and Gerald's house to collect her belongings. Neighbors saw her with Gerald the next day. On September 8, Carolyn spoke to her brother in Colorado on the phone, and he asked her to meet him in Denver for a gem show. She told him she was still at Gerald's and wanted to leave but was afraid to. The next day, Gerald took Carolyn to University of Texas Medical Branch (UTMB) in Galveston, and Carolyn spoke to a counselor and said Gerald wanted to commit her to the hospital. She told the counselor she'd been a victim of his physical, verbal and sexual abuse for a long time. The counselor suggested they separate. On September 10, Carolyn gave Gerald power of attorney to sell her truck, something her friends say is very uncharacteristic of her behavior. She was very attached to her truck and once told her friends, "If you ever see Gerald driving my truck, I'm dead." Carolyn kept a UTMB appointment in Galveston September 13. She had a follow-up appointment scheduled for September 30, but missed it. A few days later, Gerald claimed she had left to go to Wichita. A change of address card arrived at the Wichita post office, listing Carolyn's new address as her mother's home in the 2500 block of Victoria Street in Wichita, but she never arrived there. Carolyn's brother reported her missing on October 1. By this time, Gerald had already invited another woman to live with him. The woman later said she noticed some oddly shaped meat packages in Gerald's freezer, and he told her not to touch them because they were bad. She also said that although Gerald told her Carolyn had moved, she had left all her belongings behind at his house. Gerald's girlfriend passed a polygraph, and police believe her statements are true. Authorities located another witness who saw the same strange meat packages. One neighbor reported seeing Gerald dragging a freezer to his truck in the middle of the night, driving away and not returning for 2 days. Another neighbor saw him digging in the yard, something he'd never done before. In 1995, the police got a warrant to search Gerald's home. He had moved out 6 months before and was renting it out. The new tenants had removed the old carpet and replaced it with tile because the carpet had a large stain on it. Police sprayed the home's interior with luminol, a chemical designed to detect blood traces, and found what they believe was a pool of blood in the hallway leading to the backyard. Cadaver dogs indicated the scent of human remains at a spot in the yard where a shed had been, and when investigators dug it up, they found some carpet fibers but nothing else. They think a body might have once been at that spot, however. Authorities determined Gerald was able to steal most of Carolyn's property after her disappearance by forging her name on notary documents. Carolyn's mother got a postcard after her disappearance that was supposedly from Carolyn and said she was fine and working out some problems, but handwriting experts determined it was probably Gerald who wrote the card. Gerald remarried after Carolyn's disappearance and moved to a trailer outside of Alvin. He died of natural causes in 2001. He remains the prime suspect in Carolyn's disappearance. Authorities believe Carolyn was in some way involved in Roy's disappearance, but he has never been located.
Number 4.
Anthony was last seen walking to his school on the morning of May 8, 1983, in Lemon Valley, Nevada. He was a 5th grade student at Lemon Valley Elementary School and lived with his mother and stepfather a half-mile from the school. Although Anthony's normal route to school was to walk north of Fremont Street, he apparently went in the opposite direction the morning he disappeared. A witness saw him in a cul-de-sac on the south end of Fremont Street, talking to an unknown individual driving a rusted-out vehicle, possibly a Ford Pinto or a Camaro. He never arrived at school and has never been heard from again. The school didn't notify Anthony's family that he didn't show up for class. As a result, they didn't realize he was missing until later that day, when he didn't call his mother, as he was supposed to do every day after he got home from school. She notified the police after she came home. It got dark, and Anthony had still not arrived home. Anthony was a member of the 4-H club, and the day before his disappearance, he won a blue ribbon for showing his pet pony and 2 rabbits at a 4-H show. He took his ribbon with him when he left for school the next day, planning to show it to classmates. A month before his disappearance, he ran away from home and went into the mountains after his mother punished him for poor grades. But that time he took some food and dishes with him, left a goodbye note, and then returned home within hours. When he came back, he cried and told his mother he would never run away again. When Anthony vanished in May 1983, the police initially assumed he'd run away a second time and didn't start to investigate other theories until several days had passed. His mother never believed he had run away because he was very happy on the day of his disappearance due to his 4-H ribbon. Both his mother and stepfather took polygraph tests and were ruled out as suspects. His mother stated Anthony was somewhat naive for his age and would have talked to a stranger. Investigators believe Anthony was abducted while walking to school and probably murdered. His mother continues to hope he's still alive. No strong suspects have ever been identified in his disappearance. It remains unsolved.
Number 5.
McFadden was reported missing on June 26, 2019, 6.5 years after his disappearance from Charlottesville, Virginia on November 23, 2014. His disappearance may be connected to the disappearance of Dashid Sage Smith, a transgender woman whom McFadden knew. Smith disappeared from Charlottesville on November 20. She and McFadden had been exchanging texts and calls for weeks prior to Smith's disappearance. They had met in person before, and Smith accepted money in exchange from the promise to keep herself a secret from McFadden's girlfriend. On the day she disappeared, Smith had plans to meet McFadden near the Charlottesville Amtrak station. She has never been heard from again, and her disappearance is being investigated as a homicide. On November 23, McFadden, who lived in Charlottesville and had a job at a paint store, abruptly left town. His girlfriend reported him missing on November 24. McFadden called the police on November 27 and spoke to them on the phone, saying he was in New York. He said Smith never showed up for their planned meeting and he didn't know what happened to her. When the police told him he should return to Virginia, he hung up on them. On November 29, McFadden's girlfriend told police he was taking a bus back to Charlottesville and expected the police to pick him up. The next day, however, McFadden's girlfriend said he had changed his mind. He emailed his girlfriend saying Smith had been blackmailing him, threatening to tell the girlfriend they had had sex. He said he did, in fact, meet with Smith on the day of her disappearance, but he did not know what happened to her and that Smith had a lot of enemies. The last sign of McFadden was an email he sent to his girlfriend in May 2013 from an untraceable email address. He has not been seen or heard from since. Investigators interviewed McFadden's mother in June 2019. She said she'd assumed her son's father had filed a missing persons report for him. When she found out this wasn't the case, she filed a report herself on June 26. Both McFadden's mother and his stepmother believe he may be deceased. McFadden attended Lincoln University in Oxford, Pennsylvania from 2009 to 2011. He may have traveled to the following places: Baltimore, Maryland, Joppa, Maryland, Lake City, South Carolina, Columbia, South Carolina, Atlanta, Georgia, Rochester, New York City, or possibly somewhere on the West Coast. He is a critical person of interest in Smith's disappearance and presumed homicide. Both cases remain unsolved.
Number 6.
Erik exited his northern Lebanon school bus near the intersection of U.S. Route 22 and Pennsylvania Route 72 in Union Township, Pennsylvania on December 12, 2000. He was last seen walking behind the Jonestown Bible Church towards a wooded area near U.S. Route 22 at approximately 2:30 p.m. He has never been heard from again. Erik and his younger brother lived with their older sister, Maria Custer, and her husband and 3 children on AWOL Road in 2000. Their parents reside in Luray, Virginia. Custer took custody of the 2 boys after their parents neglected them. She stated both of her brothers had behavioral problems. Erik rebelled against her rules and curfews by running away several times in the past, but he always returned by nightfall. Custer said that Erik used the first name Nick as an alias because he took the name while playing school as a young child. He also told people he was from Cleona, Pennsylvania, but his sister reported that Erik was unfamiliar with the town. He has been known to hitchhike in the past. Custer enrolled Erik in counseling sessions after he moved to Pennsylvania. He was an inpatient at Philhaven Behavioral Healthcare Services 2 times, and Custer also attempted to have him placed in a residential treatment center to address his behavioral issues. Authorities said there were unconfirmed sightings of Erik at the Mount Gretna roller rink, at a local mall and other areas in the vicinity after his disappearance. Search dogs tracked his scent to a densely wooded area near his home, but no trace of him could be found. His case remains unsolved. Custer has since remarried and taken the last name Furman. She has passed a lie detector test in connection with Erik's disappearance, and police do not believe she was involved in his disappearance or harmed him in any way before he vanished. Authorities investigated the possibility that Erik ran to the Shenandoah Valley area of Virginia, where his parents and other relatives live. He had previously talked about going back to Virginia. Police questioned several of his family members there, but the interviews turned up no leads indicating Erik's whereabouts, and there's no evidence that he ever arrived in Virginia. The Jonestown station of the Pennsylvania State Police is handling Erik's case.
Number 7.
Sierra disappeared from Midway, Alabama on April 13, 2018. She was last seen on Woody Johnson Road, carrying a pink purse and a large purple duffel bag. Authorities believe she left of her own accord. She was later sighted in Arlington, Texas on May 31. In June 2018, 18-year-old Joshua Rahi Petterkin was arrested in his hometown of Dallas, Texas, and charged with interference with custody in Sierra's case. They had met online, and Sierra arranged for Petterkin to drive to Alabama and get her. When interviewed, he admitted he'd taken Sierra to Texas and that she'd been staying with him, but said she left the day before his arrest. Investigators stated Sierra had been active on social media since her disappearance and they believed she was in hiding, possibly still in the Dallas area. Her biological parents live in Texas and she may be in contact with them. Her case remains unsolved.